This is a presentation that I have marketed across HHS to our CIO council, executive officers, and it doesn't work. And I think I have one records officer here from HHS. I have a couple of our support consultants and contractors here. I don't think there's anyone from my CIO's office, though, which is probably pretty good. So my background, I'm an IT project manager. So I came into the records officer position at HHS 2 years ago. I manage Records and Paperwork Reduction Act. About 10 years ago, we, as a contractor, we migrated HHS from a paper-based to paperless environment for the Paperwork Reduction Act. So, and one of our contractors is here from the company I used to work for, and that was a big endeavor. OMB said, we're not accepting paper anymore, what are you going to do? So we actually did it. We collect billions of hours of responses from the public every year, and it is paperless. So I think the struggle for record keeping at HHS is when I talk to our executives, so the top left here, these are the milestones that Nara reviewed this morning. Here's my big red ticket items email. What do we mean when we talk about record keeping for email? I have a chronology of significant milestones, and then also a tool that I'm thinking of launching across the department. So all of our 11 operating divisions, NIH, CDC, CMS, we can all come up with the same requirements as we move from paper to electronic. So I think our records officers, when I think of the first milestone, paper, they deal with boxes, and when we get a call from a litigation hold or any congressional inquiries, our records officers call the Federal Records Center for boxes to come back to the agency. We go through the boxes. So as we move to an electronic environment, I'm still trying to protect that role for our records officers. I'm a little concerned that the more that we use technology to answer record keeping, that some of our records officers may not have a role as we move to this environment. So I know that we have records custodians. We do have employees that particularly manage, their job is to manage that paper. So when we move to a secured environment, particularly as it's based in the cloud, how are our records officers going to get access to those files? Do they have to? So that's a big thing for me. I have our Office of the Secretary Records Officer reports to me. So I just want to make sure that I protect that records officer role. So when the CIOs hear this, they think that their responsibility is policy. However, all of our CIOs, the systems that are in their domains that are, I'll use unaccompanied children at our Administration on Children and Families, our CIOs are responsible for those systems. So I think our CIOs think that someone else is going to manage our office productivity suite, so the records that we're creating every day, that's one thing. But the other piece of it here is our systems. So I think slowly but surely our CIOs are understanding what we mean when we're talking about record keeping, I guess whether they like it or not. So part of the struggle at HHS is, what do you mean when you talk about permanent records? So our CIOs have asked, what are some examples of your permanent records? So our senior agency official for records management, who's one of our assistant secretaries, same thing. He said, well, I don't understand what a permanent record is. So I define that as a record generated at HHS that is owned by the National Archives. So when I go back to the earlier slide and I talk about email, I don't know if our senior officials who have permanent email records, when I tell them, if everything remains the same, your email box, when we deliver it to the National Archives, it's on full display. Oh, but I'm too busy. I have all my personal appointments in my calendar. And I have emails from my kids' soccer league in my inbox. So the need now, maybe we should follow NARA's guidelines to have records officers, record keepers go into the email boxes and start moving out that data. So it's a challenge for me, probably on a daily basis, to make sure for all of our stakeholders that we understand, again, what record keeping is. I got a call yesterday from some of our email administrators, and they're like, hey, we bought a couple servers, and we want to expand backing up email, so can we have a phone call? And I'm like, what do you, like, email's in the cloud. I know when I go back to the earlier slide and we talk about Capstone, and I'm sorry if you all know this, but we have, in 2016, federal agencies were, the guidance from NARA was to, well, we haven't made a decision yet at HHS if we're going to use our email environment for record keeping. So it took yesterday, 3 years after, it took December 2019, for me to have that conversation with our email administrators. Are we saying that email is now going to be used for record keeping? If it is, every employee at the department, we have to minimally keep their email for 7 years. And then we have our senior officials, a small subgroup. Those are the ones that will go to the National Archives. We have some administrative support teams. Maybe we'll keep the email for 3 years. So as I'm talking to the email administrators, I said, the record is what we send. So every day, everything in my inbox, that's okay, that's what people are sending me. The records that I'm generating are the ones that my attachments that I'm sending out, and that should be saved for 7 years. When we talk about e-discovery and we have all these other tools and systems being set up, I'm like, but if we start somewhere and keep that across the board, let's say I'll start with email for 7 years, why do I need all these other tools for e-discovery? And it ended up, after I was on this conversation yesterday for probably about an hour with our email administrators, it ended up they had purchased more servers for litigation holds because they're running out of space for all of our documents on litigation holds. I'm like, but we don't have that many. When our litigation holds are lifted, those records go back to their original schedules. So even that, all these years later, trying to achieve the milestones in M1218, and now we have the new ones, M1921, it's a very, we still don't have the definitions down pat at HHS. So this seems to be a slide that works pretty well across the agency. When I talk about permanent records, right now, when we deliver to the record centers, our permanent records, we have in those boxes. So that's what's changing January 1st. And I try to kind of keep this pretty basic for our, even for, I don't mean to say basic for the CIOs, but to give them something that they can think about. So when I talk about electronic files January 1st, I've been asking all of our records officers, well, do you know what we're supposed to do January 1st with the permanent records? Yep, we're set. I can walk around. I did it yesterday. We have an Office of the Secretary. We have 17 assistant secretaries. Those are our permanent officials. They'll have binders at the end of the day, their meetings, or they have their tablets and they're taking notes. Those are their permanent records. So I'm trying to figure out, well, how am I going to get that paper digitized, make sure that I can verify its authenticity, and then put it somewhere in 15 years, send it to the National Archives. So it seems like that's pretty easy, and I know we'll have the standards, more standards coming out in the spring from NARA what to do, but it's not easy. And I think our records officers are not IT people, so they're pretty overwhelmed, so it's easier. I don't want to say easier, but the comfort zone is manage the boxes, we'll worry about it later. Well, sure, we're not going to send these files over for about 15 years, but I think that there's something we're going to lose if we don't start getting some tools in place. So what we have had Lawrence Brewer over to our agency twice to meet with our executives to talk a little bit more about the milestones in M1921. And I thought it was pretty interesting that Lawrence says we don't have to go out and spend money on new systems. When we talk about record keeping, we can do it with what we have in place, but it's getting the awareness out is very challenging. So I thought that that was a pretty interesting way to introduce M1921 to our executives, saying that, well, we really don't have to spend money, but changing the way that we do business. And so I'm glad that this came up earlier from OMB. I don't know how our records officers are supposed to tell OMB, other than the charges that we have for the federal records centers or commercial centers. They don't know how much it costs every day to maintain our permanent records in paper. So to ask them what's going to happen in January when you're going to start storing these files, not on the DVDs, not on the thumb drive, but you're going to have to put them somewhere, they don't know how to do that. So one of the tools that I'm trying to offer at HHS from our contracting shop, we have one of our vendors who actually provides digital services across HHS has a tool that I'm trying to get 11 operating divisions to all use as part of a pilot, so they can start, again, coming up with the same requirements of, if I manage paper at a federal records center now, where am I going to manage this, whether it's a mailbox, whether it's a policy? I'm trying to figure out how the records officers can control an environment as we're waiting to accession those files to the National Archives. Temporary electronic record keeping, I think there's some things that we're working on at HHS. Maybe there's, maybe when we issue an employee a laptop, maybe we set records retention the day that you receive the device, whether it's our iPhone or a laptop. Maybe there's some things that we can start doing records retention and then have our records officers come in and apply the record keeping on top of that. So because I think asking employees, a couple, FDA is one, I know CMS and NIH, some of our larger agencies, when they're trying to use one tool for temporary electronic record keeping, it's a lot of work on the employees that for the records, I think for employees to declare records that as we're going through our work day, to make a decision of all the files that I created today, what's a record, what's not a record? Well, make it all a record. I mean, just in the back of my mind, I mean, instead of a lot of our training materials have told our employees to declare what's the record, my sense is, well, if you're using government equipment, it's all a record. And I think if we start thinking that way, I think it's less of a burden for our employees. One of our divisions is having employees make that decision every day and send files to an email address. I just think that that's a burden that employees are just going to say, well, I never mind. Somebody else can figure this out for me, right? Trying to think of some other things that are, so I guess HR came up earlier, one of the things from OPM, maybe we'll professionalize our, I think it's the 308 series. The other thing that we've been talking to our HR office about is there anything that we can learn based on an employee's role of what record keeping can apply to that person? So when I talked about email, the majority of our employees are on a 7-year email retention. Well, maybe our employees, we just say every record, every file on your laptop, every file, regardless of where it's going to be saved, keep it for 7 years, and again, have your records officers come in after and go through those files to say what they are. Full disclosure, 40 of us from HHS spent the day at Microsoft. I don't think Microsoft's in the room, maybe they are. And it was overwhelming to hear Office 365, these are all the great things that it can do. To put that burden again on employees or our IT administrators, we don't always know when our employees are coming and going, but what's important when they leave, that someone has access to the records they generated. So I think sometimes we make this a little bit more difficult than it has to be. And the final idea that I'm trying to socialize across HHS is, so NARA has given us 6 big, I'll call them buckets, which is, NARA has given us 6 areas for our records, right? We have finance, HR, technology, information management, operations, and missions. So when you go to the GRS, those are the 6 big, right? So I wonder when an employee gets a laptop, regardless of if it's OneDrive, if it's SharePoint, whatever we're using, or maybe it's a non-Microsoft shop, regardless of what the tools are, I don't think it matters to employees. But if you had to make a decision every day, oh, this is the file that I'm working on, where am I going to save it? I suspect if we give employees just those 6 categories, we can really start record keeping from the day that you come into your office. And even for the mission support, oh, but every office is unique. I know, and all of your unique record schedules will always go through that mission support bucket. So just an idea that I'm trying to pilot in my office. Anyway, I'm running out of time. Any questions? Sure.
Hi, I'm Michael Klein with NCIS, U.S. Navy. And with your IT background, shouldn't we be looking at some kind of artificial intelligence expert system sitting on top of a big data pool to, I mean, are you really picturing the labor involved in records managers diving into everybody's email? I
mean, full disclosure, I work for Jose Arrieta, who talks every day. He's our CIO, and all he talks about is blockchain, right? So, but Jose, when I talk to Jose about records and records management, it's, well, we can do policy. It's not really, I think record keeping still has I don't know what we're going to do there. So the majority of our records that we have, our workforce, the records that they're creating every day, the rules from the National Archives is you don't have to keep this file forever. So when I get a FOIA request or anything for e-discovery, I want our records officers to say, dispose. If you're following your schedule, you're not keeping it. So I wonder, as we do have all these files in the cloud, do we go back at some point and update the record schedules because maybe we are supposed to keep all the records we're generating? I don't know. I think for systems where it's important and we talk about data pools, I think when we start talking about data, every system that has records has a particular schedule. And as we move that data and we're putting it into a pool, there's some type of an instruction that records officers have about the data in those records. That is not part of the conversation, and I think as part of records officers, that is something that they should be involved in. So, hey, well, if we have this data, let's just put it out there and let's use it for something else. But as we're changing the intention of why we originally created that record, I think then we're changing that record schedule. And I think that when we have, whether it's a litigation hold or congressional inquiries, whatever, when people want to trace that data, and I also my team is part of the privacy team, so I report through the privacy and information management, who goes through our chief information security officer, so we talk about these things a lot. So I work for Jose, and having records part of that conversation has just not come up yet.
Question in the back.
Hi. Hello. Oh, okay. Hi, I just had a question for my own information. So I work at Defense Information Systems Agency, and our organization is widely geographically dispersed. So I was curious, how big is HHS in terms of, like, how many records officers do you have, and how many employees are those records officers managing? I know under me alone, we would have 8,700 plus employees. So I don't have a concept of how big your organization is.
Yeah. So HHS is 80,000 employees, and we have we have I don't know how many contractors we have, but hundreds and hundreds. So we're around the world. We have the NIH, FDA, CDC, CMS. We have emergency responders, thousands of them, right? So. We have I'm the agency records officer. We have 11 big divisions. Indian Health Service, who's our records officers here today. And again, the other one, CDC, NIH. They have one. Not all records officers some of our records officers have other duties as assigned, and as we go through our divisions and our branches, that's probably the largest challenge that we have, to have single records officers focused on records management every day.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Eyal Bloomstein from Zimmerman Associates. I want some clarification, if I may, for a couple of things that you said. One, you mentioned that you look at emails with attachments, and that would be the record, the attachment. Is that correct? Or because a lot of the business that we do today
Right.
is actually in the body of the email, not necessarily the attachment.
So, great question. I wasn't clear. We haven't made that determination yet. So yesterday when I heard from our email administrators and they were asking me questions, I was starting to, are we going to use email for record keeping? And is it the attachment or the subject? So we did talk about that. I don't know.
Question was, with regards to email, since you said you're going to keep retention for 7 years, many of the government agencies, we support FDA.
Yeah.
So one of the things is, developing a drug, for example, can take upwards of 18 years before it's launched. Mm-hmm. So some of the business needs are longer than 7 years.
Sure.
And so how does that get applied? Are the emails kept internally in an electronic content management system? Mm-hmm. Do they, after the retention, go to FRC electronically? If so, what is your thought about how to do that?
So great question. I think that our operating divisions will implement their own policies. So I know FDA, they actually have hundreds and hundreds of mailboxes on a permanent retention. So in reference to the responsibilities for the National Archives, they know which mailboxes are permanent, the ones that have to be delivered to NARA for, exactly as you were talking about, for scientific reasons, for research. The ones that they have on permanent retention, the delicacy there is, well, when we have FOIA requests coming in, if policy says, well, you didn't have to keep it for longer than 7 years, then FDA will have to make sure that they have the, I'm not telling FDA how to do their job, but I talk to Tiffany a lot. So if they are going to have these exceptions, then that would be part of their implementation policy. So, and I should be clear, we have not implemented the 7 years across the board for our employees. It was just something that I was, again, when we talk about record keeping, I think it's easier to start talking to our IT community with retention. What are some easy things that where we can start?
All right, and we're going to have to leave it
Sure.
there. Here's your paper.
Thank you.
And Debbie, thank you very, very much.
Sure, thanks.